Hi everyone, it's Plesky P coming in from Melbourne, Australia. Got a very special guest, David Kramer. How are you today, David?
Great. Thank you.
No worries. We want to talk about this fantastic Jimi Hendrix movie that you made that's a documentary, and you had the premiere last month. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was in Nyack, New York, at the Nyack International Film Festival, and they had it at the Hotel Nyack. And there was about 70 different films that were entered, and I won for the best documentary.
That's amazing. Congratulations on that. And this is a 30-year labor of love on the film.
Yes.
And also, I believe you interviewed over 400 people. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I interviewed well over 400 people, the biggest names in the history of music, all the big rock icons of the 60s: Joe Cocker, Stephen Stills, Sly Stone, Ginger Baker, Jack Bruce, on and on and on. Eric Burden, Jimmy's girlfriends, the woman that was with him when he died, Monica Danneman, the two doctors that tried to revive him when he was brought into emergency. Just it's really the most complete, definitive documentary ever produced on Hendrix. It's in depth and it's a story. Some people say, "Well, did you get the Hendrix music?" I've got some Hendrix music, but the Hendrix estate does not allow anybody to use their music for documentaries or movies about Hendrix. So I do have a lot of recreations of Hendrix music by some great, great guitar players. So it's really the story, it's the story of Jimmy's life. If you want to hear his music, buy his DVDs and CDs and you'll hear his music. But this is really the in-depth story about Jimmy's life.
I just need to ask you, with Jimmy, as I said, he's such a world phenomenon, even today, right? His music is selling
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. He was a pioneer before his time as far as the story goes. But Jimmy the Man, what did you find out more about Jimmy the Man?
He was very well liked by everybody. I didn't hear any negative words about him at all. Everybody loved him. The musicians idolized him. His peer musicians idolized him. Everybody thought he was the greatest as far as his musicianship. And then he was just loved by everybody. Fans, girlfriends loved him. He was just a very charismatic person.
Tell me a little bit about Chaz Chandler, because he had a lot to do with taking off with Jimmy's career.
Well, Chaz, towards the end of the Animals tour, he decided he wanted to get into management. So he went to New York City. That's where the tour ended with the Animals. So he was going around to different clubs and talking to people, and he ran into Linda Keith, who was a beautiful model, formerly Keith Richards' girlfriend. And then Jimmy stole her away. And then she ran into Chaz in a club, and Chaz told her that he was getting into management, and she said, "Oh, I got the perfect guy. His name's Jimi Hendrix. You got to check him out. He's unbelievable." So Chaz went down to see him. He went to check him out in Greenwich Village in a few clubs. He saw him at the Cafe Wa, saw him at the Cafe A Go Go, and he was blown away. And he courted him for a little while, I guess for a few weeks, and then he asked him if he wanted to go to England, and Chaz would manage him.
This is a fascinating documentary. It's got my attention, and I'm sure that all the Jimi Hendrix fans out there, and also the music fans and the up and coming new fans, are going to really get into this movie. How can everyone see the movie?
Well, I'm trying to get a deal now. I'm talking to different people, and hopefully I'll get a deal, and then it'll be seen. But right now, I'm just dealing with different companies to just taking my time. I spent a lot of time working on it, so I got to take my time to get the right deal, not rushing into anything.
I totally am with you what you're saying, but the fact now you've already won an award, I think that's amazing. But not only that, as I said, true congratulations to you.
Thank you.
I just think it's amazing that you got this done within 30 years and the people that you've interviewed, as I said, again, this is like something once it goes out to the public, it's going to get everyone's interest. And I'm sure you know that.
Oh yeah, nobody's ever done anything like this before. It's really in depth where I cover his entire life and go into the early bands that he played in, Little Richard's band, um, the Isley Brothers. I talked to the Isley Brothers. I interviewed BB King, Bo Diddley, Buddy Guy, James Cotton, all the blues legends that were around when Hendrix first came onto the scene before he was even famous, when he toured with Little Richard and he toured with the Isley Brothers and the King Curtis Band and Curtis Knight and the Squires and Joey D and the Starlighters.
Yeah.
All these people that saw him before he was famous. Nobody's ever done that before. And I interviewed all these band members, and most of them are all dead now. So nobody's ever going to get these people. I got something that nobody ever got before.
Now, to me, as I said, it's just fascinating. I've interviewed Joey D, and he speaks about Hendrix being in his band. And I mean, even at that stage of his career, the man's just got so much talent. He's like he's come from another planet. And what he can do with a guitar, no one's done that. Just ahead of his time. You'd agree with that?
Oh yeah, way ahead of his time. He influenced everybody. Nobody ever played feedback like that or did the kinds of sounds that he did. He influenced generations of people.
I mean, the fact he played even there in London, I believe, and the Beatles were watching him, and he came out and he played Sergeant Pepper because the album was released is amazing too.
He had his finger on the pulse at all times. He knew what was happening in music and what was coming out and what was new and fresh, and he listened to everything and he liked everything that was good. A lot of people don't know that he did an early version of rap music with the Last Poets. Did you know about that?
No.
The Last Poets was a group of rappers, doo-wop guys that got into early rap, which was like jail toasts and things like that. And it became a whole huge genre, as you know. Now it's huge, rap music. But he did this in like 1969 with a member of the Last Poets, where he played guitar and bass, and Buddy Miles played drums and keyboards on it. And they had this rap singer, Jamal, sing, actually rap, and that was later released. So that's pretty cool. He did all kinds of stuff. He was open to everything.
Now, after the experience, right, the Jimi Hendrix experience, what did you learn more about his direction? Like what he wanted to do from doing these interviews?
He wanted to do a lot of different things. He didn't want to stay with the experience his whole career, but his management was kind of forcing him to do that because they were making a lot of money and it was very successful. And his manager didn't want to change that. But as most artists do, they want to grow and they want to expand and do other things and go into different things. And he was no different. He wanted to get into some experimental stuff with a big band rather than a three-piece power trio. He wanted to experiment with conga players and timbali and all kinds of different instruments, and synthesizers were starting to happen. And Roger Mayer, who developed the effects boxes for Hendrix, which gave him a unique sound, Hendrix asked him to come up with an effects box for his keyboard player, a guy named Jerry Guida, who did some recordings with Hendrix. Jerry got Roger Mayer to build him an effects box for his keyboards. So he was getting into all sorts of different things that a lot of people don't really know about.
Just tell me a little bit about Jimi Hendrix's studio, Electric Ladyland, and what you learned from that, and when he was going in recording. What can you tell us that no one knows?
Well, Electric Lady Studios was the studio, and Electric Lady Land was the album. So we're talking about the studio, Electric Lady Studios.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was previously the Generation Club in New York City. It opened in '68, and it was only open for 3 or 4 weeks because it opened right around the time that Martin Luther King was assassinated. The Generation Club didn't last, but Hendrix wanted to buy the club, and he did. And it was going to be a club where he could jam and record. But later on, they decided to make it into a recording studio and not a club. And they had the grand opening party for it right before he left for the Isle of Wight on his last tour. So he never really got to enjoy the studio that much. He did a bunch of recordings there before it was opened, and there's a lot of great stuff he did, which came out on the Cry of Love album, that first posthumous album after he died.
That's it. Now, I'm just saying, with the overall product, and it's taken you up to 30 years, I mean, when you look at it now and you're watching it from the start to beginning, how do you feel now that it's like, how can I say, you've got this out and people will know about it once they actually see it? This feeling that you've got of all this very, very hard work as a fan and as a film producer.
I feel good that I finally, got it in this form to release it. One of the reasons I did it independently was so I could work on it as long as it takes to do it. I didn't want to have a deadline where they said, you got to get it out. You got to be done now. It's like, I'm a perfectionist, so I wanted everything to be perfect. And I wanted to tell the complete story without some investor saying, it's got to be done by next month. I didn't have a deadline. So that's what makes this unique. I was able to work on it and keep interviewing people and keep following leads and finding people and interviewing people. So that's why it's so in depth, and that's why it's in such detail, because there was no deadline. I didn't have to answer to anybody. I financed it, I produced and directed it, and it's my vision.
As an observer and an interview, I'm in awe about this movie. Even though I haven't seen anything, just talking about it, it's like you really want to see it. Like, for sure, Jimi Hendrix fans out there all over the world can't wait to see this kind of thing.
Yeah, people have been asking me for years when it's coming out, on the internet and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. People actually get resentful that it's not out.
People love Jimi Hendrix. Why wouldn't you want to see more about Jimi Hendrix? And the way you've done it, as I
Right.
said, until you see it on the screen or on DVD or on the streaming services, I'm saying, it's just going to be,
Right.
just mind-blowing for me just thinking about it once it's out.
Yeah, people are going to appreciate it because, like I said, nobody's ever done anything like this before. When I started, I thought it was going to take about a year or two, maybe 3 years, and it would be done. But it just kept growing, and I realized you can't tell the whole story in a couple of hours. It had to be a series because there's just so much stuff that he crammed into his short life, and it just kept getting more interviews. And then you talk to somebody else and they say, did you talk to this one? Did you talk to his girlfriend? Did you talk to this girlfriend? Did you talk to this manager? And then you just keep finding out more and more and more, and it just keeps growing, and the whole snowball effect. And then you find out that he was kidnapped. Then you find out about the FBI files. You find out about the Black Panthers myth, because there's so much misinformation out there and disinformation, and it gets spread all over the internet all the time. People say something and it's total bullshit, but they take that and they run with it and they repeat it as if it's fact, but it's not.
Well, I'm just saying, it's like not only are you a film producer, but you're like an investigative journalist. And I actually reckon the project must have gone bigger and bigger than you thought. And when this comes out, what's the running time on this?
It's going to be close to 12 to 14-hour series, something like that. But it might be broken up into 2 seasons, you know. There's the early days, the childhood, up to when he forms his first band at the Cafe Wa in Greenwich Village. And then there's the second documentary, once he goes to England and he forms the Jimi Hendrix Experience right up to his death. So there's basically these 2 parts. I covered his childhood and the kids he went to school with and the people that were in bands with him in high school, and I interviewed his football coach, who later became the governor of the state of Washington, and he helped Hendrix when he was a kid, and he talks about his rough childhood. And this guy Booth Gardner, who became the governor of the state of Washington, he really helped him out, and went to the house and picked him up and brought him to the game and stuff like that. So there's some real interesting stories, and that's what I got to stress. It's the stories of his life. It's not, if you're expecting to hear his great music and see all this concert footage, there's some concert footage. There's some great concert footage I have that nobody else has. I bought a lot of reels, Super 8mm reels and things like that nobody's got. It's never been seen before. But it's more of a story of his life. That's what this is all about. The story of what happened to him, what he went through, his trials and tribulations of the greatest guitarist of all time.
Can't put a value on all the time that you spent organizing all this and the 400 interviews. And if most of these people have passed away, I mean, you got something, as you said, very, very special and unique.
The treasure trove of material, not just the interviews, but I got reels and reels of film of him that nobody's seen before, and early video of him in clubs in New York, concerts, Denver Pop Festival, Dane County Memorial Coliseum in 1970. It's just a lot of stuff that people haven't seen yet, and we were able to redigitize this footage and get it in a state where it's pristine, where it looks so crisp and clean that it looks like 16mm film, because the technology now is so much better than it used to be. We were able to transfer this footage and it just looks incredible. It's amazing to me that I was even able to get all these people to do these interviews. Some of these people, I had to deal with managers mostly, and a lot of times it would take me up to 5 or 6 years just to get the interview. You'd have to really convince them. People like Johnny Winter's manager and Stephen Still's manager. It took quite a few years to get these people, but I got them, and I got them in depth, and I got Little Richard. I mean, nobody's got Little Richard talking about Hendrix, except that, the first documentary they did on Hendrix in 1973, Warner Brothers documentary. That's a pretty good documentary. That was my inspiration. That was the first one. And they got Little Richard in there. And he's great, but he's just being flamboyant Little Richard, talking, pretty funny stuff. But I got him really talking in depth when Jimmy was in his band, and road stories and on the Chitlin circuit and the things that happened. Yeah, he's funny and he's flamboyant also, but he's also serious, talking about what really happened when Jimmy was in his band. And nobody else has any of that. Nobody's got Little Richard talking seriously when Jimmy was in his band. And you got people, I got people like BB King talking about when he first met Jimmy when he was in Little Richard's band, and Bo Diddley first met Jimmy when he was in Little Richard's band. So it really goes into the history in depth, like nobody's done it before.
David, I want to thank you so much for this interview, and I wish you all the success